the Swiss case is kind of weird because it's on the surface of it, it looks very hypocritical, but under the hood, it actually has a lot to do with the self-conception that Switzerland has of itself and the this uncharted territory that is also new for Switzerland, this multipolar world that is still very foreign to many Swiss to interpret. So, what do I mean with that? I mean that when the war, on 24th of February 2022, Russian troops crossed over the Ukrainian border, the Switzerland, together with most of Western Europe, was utterly shocked and didn't expect that and had the same kind of knee-jerk reaction as the rest of Europe, which is to say that this is an unprecedented breach of the international order. This is unfathomable that land-based warfare returns to Europe, and we will put sanctions on the aggressor, Russia. So Switzerland was fairly and squarely inside the mental camp of the West, of the collective West. They interpreted, or at least the people in charge of policy interpreted things the same way or in very similar ways as the Germans, the French, the British, and the Americans did, and the way that the media narrative was spun. And inside Switzerland, one of the most controversial parts of our government that made a lot of people on the street angry and actually led to protests was that the Swiss took 5 days to to put sanctions on Russia. The European Union put them on day, I forgot which one, the 25th or the 26th, and Switzerland took 5 days. And then, especially my party, the Social Democrats, they organized demonstrations in Bern and to put pressure on the government and to finally also put sanctions on Russia. And then they did. Then they did put sanctions on Russia. And still, until this day, some people in Switzerland will tell you that they feel ashamed that it took 5 days, 5 incredible days for our government to make up its mind and put sanctions. Although this is of course unfair because not putting sanctions is also making up your mind. But never mind. The point is that when it comes to the interpretation of the war, of what happened, who's the aggressor, who's the victim, who's to blame, a large part of the Swiss population, and I would say the media and so on, is clearly following the Western narrative, and therefore comes up with the same prescriptions. Now, when it comes to economic interaction and who's to blame, on the other hand, this tradition of neutrality also meant that Switzerland was careful when it came to military affairs, and our government decided to stick to the rules of The Hague, and not only The Hague, but also to our own a very important law, a domestic law of weapons export law that prohibits Switzerland from exporting weapons to war zones and to any belligerent party that finds itself that is a belligerent that is in a war with another party. And that meant Switzerland never sent weapons to Ukraine. It sent humanitarian goods, but it never sent weapons. And which is something that enraged people on the side of the political spectrum who said we need to support the victim, right? And Ukraine is the victim, and therefore we need to support them, and we should actually either send weapons ourselves, although the discourse was a little bit more nuanced because the question of sending weapons ourselves is a very touchy one. But there was the question on whether Switzerland should allow the Germans and a couple of other European states who had Swiss-made weapons to re-export them. Because it's important to know that Switzerland puts these clauses in these export agreements. If we export weapons to third states, to friendly states, we put a clause in there saying, like, if you ever want to give these weapons to a third state, another one, you need to ask us first. You need our permission, and otherwise we don't sell you this in the first place. And the Germans and others, they said they signed this clause saying, like, fine, okay. And then they asked us, can we please re-export your weapons to Ukraine? And Switzerland then said no, and this enraged a couple of people. But the our government stuck to that position and didn't allow for re-export to happen, although there were political approaches, especially in parliament 3 times, to change that, but it failed every time. So Switzerland put economic sanctions. Switzerland put itself rhetorically on the side of the West, but militarily it took a more cautious approach, saying that our neutrality demands of us that we keep weapons deliveries from that Swiss weapons shouldn't reach even Ukraine, even though Switzerland recognizes it as a victim. So now internationally that is very poorly understood on both sides. The Russians too are now claiming, Switzerland, you're not neutral anymore because we don't care whether or not you withhold weapons. We see that you are rhetorically and economically on the side of the West. Therefore, we regard you as an unfriendly country, and they put us on the list of unfriendly countries because of the sanctions mostly, and they paid us back in kind. So Switzerland closed its airspace to the Russians for civil air overflight, and the Russians said, "Okay, we close our airspace to you, Switzerland," which is a very natural thing to happen, right? Reciprocity. Um, so the Russians don't perceive Switzerland as neutral anymore, not as a neutral actor. This is also shows quite well in the fact that all of the important negotiations happened clearly outside of Switzerland, right? They happened in Minsk, they happened in Belarus, Belarusia, they happened in Istanbul, in Turkey. Interestingly, a NATO member, but a member that didn't put sanctions. That's behaving a NATO member that's behaving in a sense more neutrally than the Swiss, who are not a NATO member. But it depends on which level of the conflict you're looking at, right? And now the most recent negotiations between the Russians and the Americans is happening in Riyadh, in Saudi Arabia. So Switzerland is losing its air and its reputation as a neutral country, as a neutral space. Whether we get that back or not will probably also have to do with this neutrality referendum that is now discussions that are now going on inside Switzerland. And it's important to know that the Swiss themselves are not clear on what their neutrality is supposed to be and what not. There's a big debate inside the country among many different actors and government, parliament, civil society, and different groups within civil society, different groups within the different political parties who have like very divergent opinions on how Swiss neutrality should continue, what it should be defined as. And so Switzerland is, in a sense, at the moment in a transition period and in flux, where its future shape or its future foreign policy pillars are not yet set in stone.
Mm. But following up on this, could you on maybe a second part of exposition of Switzerland's role in the world, could you elaborate on the reality of neutrality, but mostly also on the ongoing debate on neutrality, how it is being shaped around this referendum that you alluded to, what the main positions are in society, and how this might seems likely to play out.
So there's several actors involved in this, right? And again, like it depends very much on how you view conflicts and how you interpret the history of conflicts in Europe in general. But overall, what we have is our national government, the Federal Council, that says that it is responsible for formulating Swiss neutrality. Swiss neutrality is codified in the Swiss constitution. Codified, sorry, it is mentioned twice. It's mentioned. The word neutrality is mentioned twice, but it is never defined in the constitution. So far, the Swiss have defined what their neutrality means through policy papers and policy pronouncements. Toward the outside world, saying like, white paper on neutrality, 1993. This is what Swiss neutrality means, and this white paper was developed by the Federal Council, which put a couple of people in charge of talking about it and making proposals. And in the end, it was the Federal Council that then said, like, look here, this is how our neutrality should be understood now in the post-Cold War era. The one of the debates that's going on is whether that should stay that way. Should the government be responsible for interpreting and reinterpreting Swiss neutrality and setting the agenda. Of course, the Federal Council says that's what should happen, but then there's another group of people, and I belong to those who say, like, no, we need to change this. We should have parameters in the Swiss constitution that define overall the broader spectrum of what Swiss neutrality should mean. And this group of people, I'm not directly included. I'm just a passive, an active supporter. But there was a group that created an initiative. So in Switzerland, we're under our direct democratic system. Any Swiss citizen with a Swiss passport has the ability to write down on a Word file or wherever you want new paragraphs to our constitution. We can draft new constitutional paragraphs, and then we can submit those as an initiative for a change of the constitution, and then the process starts. And if you achieve 100,000 together, 100,000 signatures of fellow Swiss citizens within a period of 18 months, then your initiative will be transformed into a referendum. Then it will go to be voted on by the general population. And if during that referendum, when people like put the ballot into the ballot box, right, and say like, I want this, yes or no, you only have the option yes or no. If 50% of the people in the country say yes, and 50% of the Swiss cantons, so 13 out of, we have 26, so 13, or like you need more, you need 14. 14 out of 26. If they say yes, we want that, then it will be, you win. And this change, this proposed constitutional change will become part of the constitution, and the government, the Federal Council has almost no way of blocking that, and even Parliament has only very, very limited ways of blocking this. Only if there are errors in the form in which this thing was proposed, they could still like block that. But we are already at this point beyond this stage, to my knowledge, and it will be this referendum will be a fact, and it will happen either in fall 2025 or maybe spring 2026. The timeline is not quite clear. There's still things that could delay it, but it will become a referendum. And the proposition of that specific referendum will be to write 4 paragraphs into the constitution. Paragraph 1 defining Swiss neutrality as armed neutrality. Secondly, so maintaining a military and maintaining a military as it does now. That Switzerland will not join a military alliance unless it is attacked or threatened by an attack. And thirdly, and that's the most hotly disputed paragraph, would be that Swiss neutrality also extends to the economic realm. So we are not just militarily neutral, we will also be economically neutral, and we will not put sanctions on states that are at war with other states. Unless there's 2 exceptions, unless there's a UN Security Council resolution to that extent. If the UN and the Security Council says we will sanction somebody, then Switzerland will adhere to that as a member of the United Nations as part of its obligation. And the second exception is we will not put sanctions on other countries. If there is a war going on or armed conflict, and third states put sanctions on a certain on countries, then Switzerland would take political action to prevent the circumvention of those sanctions by other states by one of the belligerents. So we will not continue having normal economic interchange with belligerents. We will recognize that a conflict is ongoing and that these are special times, and we will not try to help circumvent the sanctions of third parties by doing business through Switzerland. So we will recognize that this is not just normal economic times, but it is special economic times and needs special consideration. But no sanctions like from ourselves on one of the belligerents just because the other one might say so, right? take the war between Russia and Ukraine, just because Germany, France, and Britain and the USA, everybody needs to put sanctions on Russia. Switzerland would not automatically do that just because of the moral and political pressure, but it would rather act like India, rather act like Indonesia, rather act like the states of Africa, which all refrained from putting sanctions because they said this is a difficult conflict. It is not clear to us at all. We don't like it. We don't want it to happen. We condemn the invasion, but we will not put sanctions on one of our partners. We will not put sanctions on Russia. We will not put sanctions on Ukraine. We will continue having economic relationship with both of them. Yeah, so the proposition of paragraph 3 of the Neutrality Initiative is that Switzerland should use an approach like that toward international conflict. And the fourth paragraph is that Switzerland will be available, will make its diplomacy available to all parties in a conflict and try to do whatever it can in order to bring about an amelioration of the situation and offer its good offices to everyone. So that's the proposal that's on the table. And that proposal has to be voted on in due course by the Swiss populace. And now we are in a process in which different parts of the political spectrum argue for or against this proposal. I argue for it for lefty reasons. I mean, I'm part of the paying member of the Social Democrats. I have social democratic values, and I think there's a lot of these values that would support such an approach. There's people in the Social Democrats who oppose this, and vehemently so, mainly for moral reasons, because they say it would be immoral not to put sanctions on an aggressor. Then usually the point where I ask them, yeah, but what do we do if the United States again becomes an aggressor? I mean, if the United States again invades Iraq, shall we give Iraq weapons to defend themselves against the United States? Or if this, but okay, it's a different debate. And then there's people who argue that Switzerland's neutrality, although we should maintain neutrality, we should make it a neutrality that is in favor of the morally good side, right? And the morally good side usually coincides with what the West does. So we will. There's this committee of academics and intellectuals that published a so-called not a white paper, sorry, it's a report called Neutrality 21, where they make a proposal for what neutrality should look like, and their idea of neutrality is basically the opposite of the idea of neutrality under the initiative committee. They say like we should be neutral, but if there's a clear breach of international law and there's a clear aggressor and a clear victim, then Switzerland should actually send even weapons to the victim, because we need to support that, because the obligations of supporting a victim also under the UN Charter weighs more heavily on a state than its neutrality obligations. And although they say we should maintain neutrality, they define neutrality in a way that to me makes it absolutely useless and meaningless. So I argue against that understanding of neutrality, but this debate is ongoing. And we have military people debating about the wisdom of this. We have parliamentary initiatives that don't speak about neutrality, that also speak about neutrality, but that more touch on individual aspects. Like, for instance, the drive of the Swiss government at the moment to cooperate with NATO. They produced 4 white papers over the last 3 years saying that the name of the game of Switzerland's security strategy is cooperation. Cooperation with NATO. Cooperation also with the EU, but we cooperate on all different levels, and we try to create interoperability of the Swiss forces with NATO forces, and that's the goal. We want to achieve that, so we want to cooperate as much as possible. And there was now even a parliamentary motion that said, "Oh, we need to stop that. By the way, this is too much cooperation. I mean, we are creating so much dependency on NATO that we basically lose the capacity of either claiming or operationally be neutral." So it's a big mess. It's a big mess inside Switzerland, but that's normal. It's the normal way in which the Swiss process works, which actually includes not just or which includes not just a few key decision makers, policy thinkers, or think tanks. It actually includes a large part of the population and civil society that all discuss, and these discussions take years. They take years, and we are now in year number 3 of the discussion. It will take at least one more to come to something that even closely will resemble a decision. And even if whether the neutrality referendum is accepted or rejected, the the further debate about the details of what neutrality means will go on, because again, like 90% of people in Switzerland are in favor of neutrality, and that one will probably remain. So yeah, big mess, but it's normal for Switzerland, and it's actually, nobody really perceives it outside of Switzerland. Nobody cares, and that's good. I mean, that gives us time to debate among ourselves.
We're at the end of the time already. Thanks a lot, Pascal. Thanks a lot for this conversation, for sharing your thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your interest, and happy to talk to you again.